Hello and welcome to LAYKA Lens, and welcome to our second season of our social distance film club, which is organized by Yiddishkayt with the partnership of the Los Angeles Review of Books. I'm Rob Adler Peckerar. I'm the executive director of Yiddishkayt. Yiddishkayt is an intercultural arts organization founded 6 years ago with the goal of preserving, cultivating, and broadcasting the treasures of the fusion culture of Yiddish, the diversity of its cultural lens, and the progressive tradition of the Jewish European and immigrant experience. And as those of you who have been joining us from the start, and I know from those of you who have RSVP'd that there are many returning viewers, and we thank you for coming back time after time. LAYKA Lens initially began as a way for us to engage with all the pressing issues today through timeless works of cinema art, using directors and writers and performers with deep ties to the life of Jewish culture as it emerged from Central and Eastern Europe as our starting and focal point. And now that we're starting off our second season of LAYKA Lens, I'd first like to bring on our partner and sponsor of this series, the poet, author, translator, and chief of the Los Angeles Review of Books, Boris Dralyuk. Hey, Boris, welcome.
Hi, Robbie. It's very good to be here. Great to see you.
It's great to see you, too. It's so exciting. We're starting a second season. We've been doing this for over a year now, like a year and a half. Wondering what you think about our ideas about our second season.
Well, I'm excited to start the second season with a comedy. I think that's the great joy for me is that we're returning to our roots. The very first film that we screened in person, our only in-person screening thus far, was the Soviet kind of extravaganza circus. And now we're returning back to the 1930s, and we're returning back to fast and loose comedy. And I feel it's actually appropriate for this second season as we emerge from hibernation, emerge from a very difficult time in everyone's lives, or at least begin to emerge from it. It's time we got some laughs. But of course, this is Duck Soup. It's not just a comedy. It's a very politically charged film. It's a great satire of American culture. So it's also in keeping with some of the themes we've been exploring over the past year and a half.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that we're bookending all this with carnivalesque, circus-like, and with the whole assemblage of people in such close proximity. It makes me feel like we're back almost in person, maybe someday soon. But it's
Absolutely,
very exciting
absolutely.
to have a comedy like that. Yeah.
So, Robbie, what was your first encounter with Duck Soup?
But I can't even remember. When I was in high school. I went to some festival of all these of the Marx Brothers movies, and I saw a bunch of them as double features, which was I feel like may have caused a certain amount of brain damage. But I recovered, and it was my first experience, and I kind of fell in love with that, with just the extent of zaniness that can be encountered in one short dose. That was my first.
Absolutely.
How about you? What was yours?
Very much the same period in my life. As a teen, I first saw, first it was Animal Crackers, and it just exploded my mind the way that the double feature exploded yours. For me, one was enough, but it really wasn't enough, because then I began to track down all the other Marx Brothers films I could get my hands on. And what appealed to me most was, yes, there was a great kind of adolescence to the comedy, but also as an immigrant who still found the English language rather funny and silly. You know, nothing is pronounced the way it's spelled. It was a great relief to see people exploit all of the tics, all of the quirks, all of the strangeness of the English language. And of course, that's also a great immigrant literary tradition. They were my entry point for that.
That's amazing. That's great. And I know we've got some incredible people that we're going to be talking tonight.
Absolutely. Should we introduce our special guests? Oh, it's my pleasure to introduce our special guests. First, I'll usher in Jim Hoberman, who has been helping us with the series almost from the very start. Film critic, journalist, author, for a long time, the senior film critic of The Village Voice. And Jim just happens to have published, not so long ago, a book all about Duck Soup from Bloomsbury Books. You'll find a link on Facebook. And our second guest is Violet Lucca, who is the web editor and digital director at Harper's Magazine, and also an active member of the New York Critics Circle. And we've come to know a real Marx Brothers aficionado.
Hello.
Thank you for joining us.
I'm going to let the three of you. I'm sorry. I'm going to let the three of you have a conversation about duck soup, and I will come back sort of at the end. And if people want to leave their comments or questions or thoughts, the chat section on Facebook or on YouTube, we'll be able to read all of those, and I will consolidate all of those, bring them to our panelists at the end of the broadcast. So I'll see all of you towards the end. See you all later.
Thanks, Robbie. Well, thank you for bearing with me, Jim and Violet. We had a little bit of a kind of a false start when I was introducing you, but that's very appropriate for the Duck Soup film. So I'll begin by asking Jim a little bit about this book, which I greatly enjoyed. It's a wonderful monograph full of details that I obviously had no idea about. So what motivated you, Jim, to write about Duck Soup? What drew you to this particular film?
Well, as I say, right, excuse me, from the outset in the book, it was my favorite movie when I was 15 years old. And so that's what motivated me to, I thought it was about time now that I could, I was ready to write about it. And, you know, it was interesting to see if I still thought it was so funny, and I still do. There are things that even now make me laugh. But I discovered the movie on television, and although, you know, the Marx Brothers were still kind of living presences then. I mean, you know, Groucho's TV show was still on in syndication, and it wasn't all that, you know, it was not really the distant past. But I was so taken with Duck Soup that I taped the soundtrack, because of course we're talking about the Stone Age here, where there were no there was no home video, but I did have a Wallensack tape recorder.
Wow.
And I taped the soundtrack. So I really do know the movie by heart. I mean, I'm very familiar with the all the lines, which of course I was very taken with then. I mean, one of the things that struck me when I was writing the book was how much of it, how many sight gags there are, and not just Harpo, obviously, but there are a lot of things that work visually, and I attribute that to the director Leo McCarey, who had a pretty distinguished career in making silent two-reelers, and in fact is the guy that invented Laurel and Hardy, which is to say he brought them together in a movie called Duck Soup. I don't know if there's a coincidence there.
Yeah, very likely.
Well, I do know that, you know, even though the Marx Brothers always denied, or Groucho, you know, denied that Duck Soup meant anything, I found out that it was actually a fairly common expression in the 1930s. It meant the same thing as a piece of cake. You know, something which this movie was not a piece of cake to make, but that's another
a cakewalk.
Another story. A cakewalk would be, but yeah.
Yeah. But, now. So what when you saw the film at 15, what appealed to you? Was it just the comedy of the film, or did you already have a sense that there was a political message? Were you picking up on some of its core message?
Well, yeah. Sure. I mean, you know, when you're 15 years old, I mean, you know, there's nothing more satisfying than having authority, you know, made fun of. I think that, you know, very soon after that, it became even more political, because there was a, you know, president of the United States who was both unpopular and ridiculous to people like myself, you know, Lyndon Johnson, so that he was, you know, it made sense. However, you know, thinking about the movie now, I think that one of the reasons why it's so brilliant is because Groucho is an authority figure in this film who's also anti-authoritarian. I mean, it's
that's right.
So that's really star magic, to be able to encompass those contradictions. But yeah, I thought the idea of an outrageous president. I mean, I was very fond of a novel at this time called The Magic Christian, a Terry Southern novel. Okay, so you know it. it
Well, I'm
reminded
an
me.
Angelino after all.
Yeah, okay. I mean, that seemed to me to be kind of a lesser version of Duck Soup, but still similar.
Yeah, I think it's no surprise that the film had a second life in the 60s. It is almost the quintessence of anti-authoritarian. Everything goes down. Everything goes down here.
Yeah.
Every institution collapses. So tell us a little bit, Jim, about how that was perceived in the 30s, which was a time of rising authoritarianism around the world.
Well, it's interesting because the movie was in production in 1933, which is the year that Hitler came to power and consolidated his regime. Also, the beginning of the New Deal, which was perceived by some people in the United States as an authoritarian, government as well. It's sometimes said that the movie was a flop. It was not a flop. It was a moderate success. I mean, Horse Feathers had been a huge hit, and this was nowhere near that, and was only the more aware kind of left-wing critics who thought that it failed because it was not equal to its subject. That really dictators were not. I don't know that they were considered beyond satire, but this wasn't up to it. The Marx Brothers weren't up to it. What's more striking is that fans didn't like it because it didn't have the things that they were accustomed to in Marx Brothers films. In other words, the film didn't stop dead so that Harpo could play the harp. You didn't have to sit through, like 𝐃𝐔𝐂 with his, like shooting the piano. I mean, these things which even as a kid I found tiresome. I mean, weren't in this movie, and people, there wasn't a chorus line, so that's what people objected to. And then even more astonishing, people didn't find it funny.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah. I mean, well, that's pathological, I think. I mean, the fact that people didn't find it funny means that there must be something really, something that was going on.
It's hitting
in
a
this
nerve.
movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, because it's not just anti-authoritarian, it's totally anti-patriotic.
Yes.
Another thing that people would have picked up on in the 60s.
Absolutely. That big musical sequence where every single element of American culture is deflated must have been fairly hard to take. I mean, in a way, it puts all of the authoritarian regimes in Europe on the same plane as the United States, which is a very radical message.
Yeah.
So people didn't find it funny. Well,
I know.
I'll trust you on that one, Jim. But let me ask Violet a little bit about what made the Marx Brothers funny in their time. Can you tell us a little bit about the history of this radical crew?
Absolutely. I just wanted to, before I start, I feel like it would be helpful to sort of situate them in vaudeville, which is this phenomenon that began after the Civil War. There was some a little bit before that, but these were, I think it's typically now associated with the comedic acts who transitioned to film, used it as a launching pad for their careers in other venues. But really, vaudeville was, like a series of separate, unrelated acts, which could include, someone singing popular music, someone performing classical music, someone, a muscle man, magicians, ventriloquists, jugglers, one-act plays, or even, and towards the end of its life, scenes from movies, from popular movies. And the so much of there's so many words and so much of culture that comes from the vaudeville tradition, and it's funny to think that it is now just so forgotten. Like the concept of, will it play in Peoria? Well, that was a legitimate concern, because what really made vaudeville was that there was these theater owners who owned chains of theaters across the country, and if it was popular in Peoria, okay, I guess we can take it around, and if it flops, we gotta dump them, leave them at some train station in the middle of Illinois. Too bad. Find your own way home.
Specifically, the little old ladies in Peoria that were the target audience.
Yeah, just as like the Iowa caucuses are seen as like the temperature of the political, of politics in America. That was That was something. And also Working Blue, that
Working Blue, right?
That the theater chains would give performers an envelope full of words that they could not say, such as hell or slob, things, because the idea was that vaudeville would be equally inoffensive to men, women, and children, not necessarily entertaining to all three, but that there were performers who kind of worked against that. And
that seems like a terrible set of laws for the Marx Brothers.
Yes. Well, I again, like the MPAA code, this was a way for people to sort of skirt around and be creative and find ways to other ways to express themselves. Or there was also just people who worked blue, that there were the way in which chorus lines, which really hadn't existed before, this was like feminine spectacle, like feminine sexuality as spectacle. And there came a point where it would be kind of surprising if the sexy lady was talented. It's like, oh wait, she can't sing, that's great, or she can play an instrument. And then of course this was also a place where like racial hierarchies of the US were propagated across the United States, because so many of the vaudevillians were coming from, they were immigrants, in big cities, mixing with other immigrants. And, this is where, this is one of the main venues by which, let's say if you were living in Olathe, Kansas, and you'd never seen a Chinese person, you'd never seen a Black person, you'd never seen a Jewish person, this is where you would learn stereotypes about them. And you would, and this is part of the reason, part of how, Irish Americans became white. Like the rest, sort of got begrudgingly lumped into the WASP social strata, and put themselves above Blacks, all these other people. But of course, like that sort of ethnic stew was embraced by those performers. That they would satirize their own culture, they would satirize their neighbors, like the Marx Brothers do.
There's a ethnic slipperiness to the Marx Brothers, which is at once extremely exciting, but also sometimes uncomfortable to watch. They they flit from one ethnicity to the other. So maybe this vaudeville is the root of that.
Yeah, and it's also the root of what Jim was saying, that there would be just these breaks where you just have Harpo playing the harp because his grandmother was a part of a ventriloquist with his grandfather, and he played her harp for many years, which is very sweet. But I would argue the true genius of the Marx Brothers, or the first genius, let's say, the Marx Brothers, is Minnie Marx, their mother, who was she was part of their act at different points when they were coming up. She was their manager, she was their producer. She would help them write material. She would do their booking. She would handle their finances. Like, she was all over this, and she was just and she even changed her name to oh God, what was it? She changed her name to it was like Minnie. She changed her surname to another surname so that she sounded like she was this vaudevillian performer that was very popular, but had actually gotten married and moved to the UK. But she used this, like the classic, like little confusion tactic many business people use of like, wait, did we go to that Thai restaurant, or was it that one? They're both on the same street. I don't know. She would use that confusion to get them gigs and use her clout. And was first Groucho. Groucho was the first one to get into the game by singing. He joined this troupe of singers, and he was abandoned somewhere. I believe it was in Kansas. Speaking of Kansas, sorry, Kansas. And he had to wash dishes and deliver groceries until his mother could wire him money home. But he loved doing it. Yeah. And then the fifth Marx brother, who was never in the films, 𝐃𝐔𝐂, joined him as a singer, and then Harpo joined them as well, coming into the act. And over the years, it changed from more of this like, the three nightingales, just them singing and
being little angels.
Being little angels. It got a little nastier as it went along, and you know, 𝐃𝐔𝐂, joined actually pretty late. But again, the act switch, it made this transformation. But there are things that were retained throughout it that, again, in a modern media context, it just doesn't make much sense.
It doesn't.
Why you would keep them. But again, it's like that they were pulling from all sorts of things. The fact that they would switch accents, like the thinking of the Lusitania, for instance, like they had to stop doing German accents in their act. They just did Yiddish accents instead. Maybe that was worse. I don't know. I wasn't there, but they had this real ability to adapt. And a lot of that, again, came from their mother, who was like really just sort of on them. And she wanted all 5 of them to perform at once, which only happened one time because 𝐃𝐔𝐂 was sick of it. Zeppo, like, as you can kind of tell from the movies, he kind of didn't care for it. So it really was the, Harpo, Chico, and or Chico, I should say, so named because he loved to chase the chicks.
Is that it? I couldn't tell from the film.
He's so busy being an Italian American stereotype that you don't see his sex appeal. However, but it was, and really that switch was led by Groucho. He was the first one to kind of like try being a clown and to do more sort of wordplay stuff, and that obviously the world is much better for it.
Yeah. Well, it occurs to me that Minnie was more of a Leninist than a Marxist with all that pressure that she put on them. But the other thing that occurs to me is what you just said a little while ago, that much of their act doesn't make sense in the modern media landscape. But in fact, it was perfect for the transition to sound, wasn't it, in film? Because they were really verbal comedians as much as they are physical comedians.
Right.
And there was a need for that kind of comedy come the sound era.
Absolutely. And I mean, they tried shooting like a silent film to kind of help boost their careers, but they didn't have a distributor. They really didn't know how the movies worked. And so they kind of just dead the water. But obviously they got their revenge. They got their sweet revenge with all these wonderful movies that we still enjoy.
Yes.
Well, their first 2 movies were shot in Long Island City, in Queens, and they were on stage during the and they would work. They would be doing their last play as a movie while they were, and then they'd go back, and they'd perform. So
interesting.
Yes. Yeah. And what sort of helped jump them, make the magical leap from 5 shows a day, which was sort of the typical grueling schedule of a vaudevillian, to the much better paid world of movies, was the first Broadway show, which was called I'll Say She Is. A little suggestive title, perhaps, which was really popular kind of all over the country, but especially with Alexander Walcott, who was the founder and kind of the leader of the Algonquin Roundtable, who were these, a totally different media landscape where there was this group of critics and comedians and just witty people, I guess, who would hang out at the Algonquin Hotel, eat lunch there, and so much of what they liked, their sensibilities, were disseminated throughout newspapers all around the country, because most of the writers lived in New York. And so when Walcott was like, the Marx Brothers are it, they were off to Hollywood.
Fantastic. Yeah. The words carried weight at that time, but it was Harpo that was the favorite at the Algonquin, right?
Yes, he was the one who used to actually sit at the table.
Jim,
with them.
The intellectual.
Yeah. Jim, could you tell us a little bit about that? But before that, let's just demonstrate what we're talking about a little bit. Violet, you picked a scene for us to watch, which is the lemonade stand.
Yes.
So roll the clip is what I'm going to say now, because I've always wanted to do that.
You understand that this guy, he's a worker for me. I ask him something, tell me nothing. I ask him why I not speak. All the time he not speak. What do you think he do? He make a fight to go like this.
Hey, what's the idea?
Oh, that's not my idea. That's his idea. All the time I say something, he not say nothing. Every time I say...
Will you shut up? Hey, listen, what are you doing around here? Who are you? Hey, can't you Can't you say anything?
No, he not say nothing.
Oh, shut up.
I am a shut up, but mister, you don't understand. Look, he's a spy and I'm a spy. He work for me. I want him to find out something, but he don't find out what I want to find out. Now, how am I going to find out what I want to find out if he don't find out what I got to find out?
Will you quit annoying me?
All right, I quit. All you got to do is to make him stop doing this.
Oh. Now, just for that, I'm going to tear you limb from limb, limb from limb. I'm going to take them, do the same.
So now you see, I not say one thing, mister, before when you... No, honest?
No. But, oh, now I'm going to get you. What are you doing? Why? I'll teach you to kick me.
You don't have to teach me. I know how.
Oh,
Stop it, Lucca. Then...
oh.
Ah, it's a good, eh?
What I love about that scene is that it's perfectly choreographed, like ballet, and it does what they do all the time, which is the straight person is infected by their madness. The madness takes over the scene. I just absolutely adore that. It's a great straight man.
But he's not an ordinary street man. I mean, that's a straight man. That's Edgar Kennedy,
Right, of
a
course.
former Keystone Cop, a guy whose nickname was Slow Burn. I mean, it's and I this is why I give McCary a lot of credit for just introducing that character and letting him be double teamed by the Marxes, which is they do that, and there's another scene with Trentino.
That's right.
Where they
That's
double
right.
team somebody. I mean, it's outrageous what they're able to do. I don't know. I still laugh.
Oh, me too.
I mean,
It's
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Jim, can you tell us a little bit more about the people behind the scenes on this? So we know a little bit about McCary. Can you tell us who else was involved?
Well, I mean, the guys who did the music are credited with the screenplay.
Mm-hmm.
And trying to remember which ones they were, but actually each of the brothers had their own gag person. And it's funny, they were typically newspaper guys, but Harpo, were often cartoonists.
Mm-hmm.
And so that they would have their own, they would be contributing their own gags to this. And this is one reason why it was so hard, why McCary had such a hard time with them, because he was used to being, before him, the director who on their previous films was kind of a laissez-faire guy. And McCary had more of a sense of himself as a director.
Yeah.
So anyway, so it's a lot of things. And they brought in things from previous work and so on. They were working on a lot of this. But I think that Groucho really polished a lot of his one-liners in this. And in fact, the opening scene is still, stunning.
I know.
But he does more. He also can be a physical comedian. He dances.
Yes.
He sings. I mean, he does a lot.
Triple threat
in that scene. Yeah, I mean, so in other words, the Marx Brothers had their own version of a writer's room that was with them on the set, and they could be really tough. I mean, when S.J. Perlman, pitched them the story of Monkey Business, which he wrote, and he was somebody who Groucho was very eager to use. He was a smart he was younger than them. He'd been a fan. Yeah. He was writing for the New Yorker, something that Groucho was very impressed by. I mean, so he pitched them the story, and they're just sitting there. They're not laughing, because they're comedians. They're like judging whether it's going to be funny or not. And they said, "This stinks." I mean, they were really, it was a shock to him. Too highbrow was one of the problems that they had with Perlman.
Don't get that guy from New Yorker.
Yeah.
Well, but Groucho couldn't wait to get published by the New Yorker.
There was a push and pull there. And Groucho was ambivalent on that question, the highbrow, lowbrow, but also politically too. I mean, what did the Marx Brothers themselves make of the politics of this film? Well,
they are unreliable, or at least Groucho, since he's the one who talks about it. He was unreliable. He claimed that he always said they had no idea that there was any political, aspect to Duck Soup and his way. We were just four Jews trying to get a laugh. That was his line.
Yeah, that's the least political thing I could imagine.
Right, and then in
1933.
Yeah, right. And then later, when the movie was, there was great interest in the movie in the 60s. He would say, well, we didn't really see it that way. That McCarry brought in all the anti-war stuff, which again makes no sense. I mean, McCarry was kind of a right-wing guy and got more so. But the anti-war stuff was there from the very beginning. And in the earlier drafts, Firefly is a munitions salesman. So the movie was made, even before it became a burlesque of dictators. It was an anti-war movie, which is something that they would have felt strongly about because, as World War I was something that as German Jews, they had to deal with, this a tremendous anti-German sentiment in the United States during the war. It's one reason why Groucho, who used to be a German comic, switched to being a Jewish, switched his German accent to a Yiddish accent.
Yeah,
because it was more acceptable. So, the one, it's interesting. It seems like Harpo was actually the most left wing at the time, if we can judge by the fact that before Duck Soup even opened, he was on a boat going to Moscow by way of Germany, actually, to appear on the Moscow stage and the Leningrad stage.
And you have a nice little note in the monograph about Eisenstein's reception of Harpo.
A great archival discovery.
Yes.
That Eisenstein, he probably saw them when he was in Hollywood because he was at Paramount when they were there. Right. So he might even have met them. Who knows? But yes, he was very taken with Harpo, and evidently the audiences were too. Harpo seems to have been quite successful.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that kind of comedy travels very, very well. Harpo's kind of Harpo's brand of comedy.
Yeah.
So let's do a speed cut, which, by the way, this film is full of speed cuts. Let's cut all the way to the 60s and 70s and the second life of this film. How was this film kind of rediscovered by the new anti-war movement of the 60s, and what has it meant for the culture since?
Well, first I should say that even though the movie was not particularly well received, by by the early 40s, it was considered to be one of the two best Marx Brothers films, and by I think that a lot of people realized that it was the best, but Night at the Opera was very popular. So the Marx Brothers, even before they retired, there was a cult that developed around them, and so the movies were shown in film societies and revivals, and then on television around 1960. And of course, once they got on television again, that's when people like myself saw the movies. And again, Duck Soup, because of the anti-war thing as well as the anti-authoritarian thing, became the most. They were popular, and it was the most popular throughout the 60s. So much so that it was difficult to rent 16 millimeter prints. I mean, there was a there weren't enough 16 millimeter prints to go around for, in college film societies.
Yeah.
So.
And Violet, how did you come upon the Marx Brothers first?
Oh, I probably saw them in probably like when I was a kid, I was a big Laurel and Hardy person. However, I never, now I'm an adult. I feel like I've flipped. I'm all in on the Marxes.
Yes.
Or whatever. This is, he's just mad at the little guy all the time. No.
Yes.
All due respect. But I'm pretty sure I saw them in film class, like a Hollywood, history of classical Hollywood. And then, of course, I sought out more of it. Because public libraries and university libraries are great places to get all these films that seem inaccessible. So
absolutely. And what did you make when you first saw them, or how was it presented to you in terms of not just the politics of the film, not the politics writ large, but also the let's say gender relations that are embedded in the film, as well as the ethnic jokes. How does that how did that strike you when you were first watching the film as a young person?
Well, some parts of it are stranger than others.
Yeah.
In regards to regards to race and sort of their use of sort of like imitation of minstrelry.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It's fine.
Minstrelsy, yes, sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
But that was kind of, I mean, again, that was just sort of in the air of the culture at the time. Definitely not like in the early 2000s. So that was kind of a shock. But then there's this reference that's actually a reference to a Paul Robeson song.
Right.
That is actually, it was him satirizing what a racist white Southerner would say about how Black people were created. But in their hands, it's extremely ambiguous, like what they're doing. I don't know if I could actually speak to it was cut out of the film in the 70s.
Yeah, and then reinstated much later. I think that at least the version I watched still has the line, which was a big popular song at the time. The reference was very clear, and Grouch is kind of proud of himself for tying the joke together with that line. But those things do change, and that's part of the danger of comedy, of course, is that you're always pushing the envelope and reaching just a little bit farther than anybody else would to get the good laugh. But with that joke accepted, much of the film still resonates, I feel, both politically and in other ways, just as sheer comedy. Now, I mean, it's a remarkable thing to see a picture from 1933 where packed with laughs, and you're still laughing at the gags.
Well,
Jim,
I would just say very quickly, having lived through only George W. Bush and Donald Trump, as opposed to Lyndon Johnson, as Jim has, it definitely resonates. It definitely means it. It's still very fresh in the ways that some things, even from 10 years ago, are not. So hats off.
Yeah. Well, as Jim said, that Groucho plays both an authoritarian and an anti-authoritarian in a way that kind of populist politics that we've witnessed over the past 6 or 7 years. Yeah. Jim can speak to this. Find an analogy.
Well, I mean, I wrote the book basically during the 2020 presidential campaign, and it was one of the for an audience. One of the ways that Groucho gets away with what he does, and if you think about it, I mean, it's hilarious. In his manifesto, that it's, he's coming out in favor of graft, in favor of capital punishment, for like, cuckolded husbands. I mean, he's just,
Pop goes the weasel.
Pop goes the weasel, right? Is that he's so entertaining.
Yeah,
and it was very easy to make that analogy to what was going on in in American politics. I mean, I thought, maybe naively that, in 2016, that Donald Trump had basically taken Andrew Dice Clay's act
Yeah.
and was playing it, that was what he was doing.
But
little did I realize it was going to be much more than that. But always, I think that, you can argue that one of the reasons he got elected was because people found him entertaining.
absolutely. I mean,
So I think,
and clay packed stadiums.
yeah. So
Yeah.
I think that there's stuff in Duck Soup that they maybe didn't even know was there when they were developing this.
One thing I want to mention is that the role of money in politics is something that's very clear there, and this is a good opportunity to mention.
Yes.
Margaret Dumont is that
Yes.
the country needs her paycheck, so she dictates.
That's right.
Yeah, she
That's
dictates who becomes president, and she's fantastic in this film as she is in every other.
Always, and a completely, people don't think that, they don't understand that she's acting.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they think that that's her. She just gets, and of course, this is something that Groucho always tried to promote. That she never got the jokes. She couldn't understand. He had to explain things to her. She was no. She totally knows what's going on, and she invented her. She had been a chorus girl herself from Brooklyn, and she reinvented her, herself in this role.
As the paragon of waspy influence.
Right. I mean, it's hilarious. Yeah.
It's extraordinary. Yeah. And I mean, how could she not get when there are, 3 Grouchos running around in her room, not giving her water? Yeah. And what she does with her eyes is really amazing. Yeah. Not even just the lines, but the delivery. So let's watch one more clip before we turn it to the discussion of the audience. I'd like to play my favorite clip, if you'll indulge me, which is the courtroom scene.
Yeah.
Yes.
Roll it.
Do anyone here to defend you? It's no use. I even offered to pay as high as $18, but I know could get somebody to defend me.
My friends, this man's case moves me deeply. Look at 𝐃𝐔𝐂. He sits there alone. An abject figure.
I object.
I say, look at 𝐃𝐔𝐂. He sits there alone. A pitiable object. Let's see you get out of that one. Surrounded by a sea of unfriendly faces.
𝐃𝐔𝐂, give me a number from 1 to 10. 11. Right. Now I ask you one. What is it? Has a trunk but no key, weighs 2,000 pounds, and lives in a circus?
That's irrelevant.
Irrelevant? Hey, that's the answer. There's a whole lot of relevance in the circus.
That sort of testimony we can eliminate.
That's fine. I'll take some.
You'll take what?
Eliminate. A nice cold glass of lemonade. Hey, boss, I'm going to good. Yeah.
Gentlemen, 𝐃𝐔𝐂 here may talk like an idiot and look like an idiot, but don't let that fool you. He really is an idiot. I implore you. Send him back to his father and brothers, who are waiting for him with open arms in the penitentiary. I suggest that we give him 10 years in Leavenworth or 11 years in Twelveworth.
I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll take 5 and 10 in Woolworth.
I wanted to get rid of habeas corpus, but I should have gotten rid of you instead.
I object.
Even I object.
Then I object too.
That's just one of those scenes that punches you, left, right, gets you on the ropes.
Well, such great timing. I mean, Chico has such great. He really has. They had a radio show together for a while. Actually, while Duck Soup was in pre-production, the two of them. So where they just, and a lot of the stuff in Duck Soup comes from the radio show.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
My favorite back and forth between them in the films is in Animal Crackers with, how much would you charge to drop into an open manhole? Just the cover charge. Well, drop in sometime. Sewer. And then before I start quoting more lines from other films, let's turn it to the audience. And for that, I'll invite Robbie back.
All right, well, we got a number of comments from the audience, and we'll start with those before I turn to some of the questions. We have Seth, who's actually from hometown of Silver Spring, Maryland. Note that how glad he was that that you had mentioned the loud piano playing in this film, and since he felt that it slowed down the other movies, I'm wondering if there are ways that you might think of other characteristics of Duck Soup that distinguishes or differentiates it from the other movies. by the Marx Brothers.
Well, there's less air between the lines. I mean, they you know, in their first couple of movies, they tend to wait for a laugh, you know, as they would if they were on the stage. That doesn't happen here. It's just like right on. If you don't get it, you don't get it. Another reason why people might have thought that it wasn't as funny, you know, because they weren't, you know, the jokes just are continuous.
Yeah.
And you could really see that in something like The Simpsons. I mean, there's so many, like the Marx's influence on everything is so like everywhere, but particularly like that style of just stacking joke on top of a joke on top of a joke. And it's just like, well, you're kind of breathless waiting for it to end, but they're always, you know, they always know where to end it perfectly.
Yeah. With a dog coming out of one's chest on a tattoo. And the dad.
I love that one so much.
I'll just say one thing. In terms of their influence, one thing that came up for me was this time around when Firefly is giving his list of dictates, his new laws. I thought of Woody Allen's Bananas. The laws there. That's a clear, obviously.
Well,
borrowing.
he's a big fan. He's a big fan. Woody.
Another thing that came up that engaged some of our viewers are a couple of theories about the origin of Zeppo's name. We have somebody who referenced that they thought that it was a reference to, they just wrote Zeppelin. I don't know if that's about the or the general or Graf Zeppelin, but that's one theory. And then we have somebody who gave a couple of sections from the documentary The Unknown Marx Brothers, which gives a couple of explanations of the name, including that Chico's daughter had said that when the Marx Brothers lived in Chicago, a popular style of humor was Zeke and Zeb jokes, which made fun of slow-witted Midwesterners. And then one day, Chico found Herbert sitting on the fence, greeted him by saying, "Hi, Zeb." Chico responded saying, "Hi, Zeb," and the name stuck. That's one. And then in the same documentary, our commenter notes, Harpo's son, Bill, said there was once a freak brother called Zippo, and the older Marxes named their brother Herbert after him. Any thoughts on these theories of the origin of Zeppo?
Sounds credible to me.
All
incredible.
Yeah,
all plausible.
I'll take one of each.
Zeppo's a cipher. That's why he never really formulated his character as the others did.
He became an agent for a while.
Really? Yeah. One question I'm wondering about is, can you tell us a little bit about just in general? I mean, you mentioned about the politics of the Marx Brothers individually. I'm wondering, maybe Jim, if you could share with us a little bit about the political sphere overall that was dominating videos at the time, and maybe we could tie that with a little bit of what Violet was talking about, and that's not necessarily directly political, but about these questions of ethnic slipperiness that are happening at the same time in cinema of the period. And what we feel about with that question and this idea of what was happening to produce the sort of the political moment that we see these films in.
Well, as I said, I think that you know, it would seem that maybe because he was hanging around the Algonquin table, although those guys were, you know, were not necessarily left wing, but you know that Harpo decided to make this trip to the Soviet Union. It had just barely been recognized, or maybe not even. And but in the late 30s, Groucho was very active in the Hollywood anti-Nazi League, so that it's enough so that he would be investigated by the FBI. There's a file on Groucho. Then in the 60s, when they were, you know, the other two had died and it was just Groucho, and he became this counterculture hero. I mean, you know, the whole trial of the Chicago 7 was understood by people as a kind of Marx Brothers thing that was happening, you know, in real time. And you know, they were going to make a movie about it. They wanted Groucho to play the judge. Then they wanted him to be, you know, he could be an expert witness and this and that. So Groucho was getting huge support from left-wingers and hippies and so on. He was he started doing a one-man show. And he also, at one point, just suggested off the top of his head, I don't even think it was a joke, somebody should shoot Nixon. Yeah. So that, of course, got investigate it again, you know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when you look at the Yippies platform, it's straight out of Duck Soup.
Yeah, and they say
ticket system, and all that. Yeah.
In terms of the ethnic slipperiness, I don't know if you want to go back to that. But I've also wondered why it is. How does 𝐃𝐔𝐂 get away with this ridiculous accent? I mean, that doesn't. I mean, maybe people are offended, but it doesn't seem to have, entered into the discourse around the movie.
Well, as an old internet saying goes, it's never racist to do an Italian accent. And I think this stands here.
There's a great Simpsons joke too with they also featured a heavy Italian accent where one of the mob bosses says, "You've brought great joy to this old Italian stereotype."
Yes.
So this is basically what we're seeing here. It's so self-aware that it kind of gets a pass.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think also just because I think Groucho once said, we would never deny that we were Jewish, but if somebody mistook 𝐃𝐔𝐂 for an Italian, we wouldn't say anything either, because I think it was just part of this, showbiz idea of like, we want to entertain people first, and who we are doesn't necessarily matter, but we're not going to deny who we are either. And obviously this was a time when, again, going back to this was a time of mass immigration, people becoming American in a way that we've just sort of internalized, take for granted now. And they, people were changing their names to sound, or had their names changed at Ellis Island to sound more American or easier to pronounce. So this is all just sort of that you could be anything and kind of keep it chaotic. That was, I think that's another form of, representing what was going on in cities. Like this sort of like different ethnic groups rubbing up against each other, having conflict, agreeing on stuff, and then also just like the melting pot of the United States that was going on.
Well, I was just say the two of the leading Jewish actors of that time became stars playing Italian gangsters.
That's right.
Edward G. Robinson and Paul Mooney.
Yeah. And James Cagney spoke Yiddish, but let's not get into that.
Yes, right.
Yeah. But I do.
But he doesn't play in Italian. You see.
No, that's right, Irish. But the slipperiness, as we've been calling it, this kind of marginal status, this liminality, ethnic liminality, is what makes them tricksters. They're coming in from outside and blending in, no matter where you find them, and then suddenly popping up and making your life difficult, and then disappearing and popping up elsewhere. That's the nature of the comedy.
Yeah, we should say that they were always assumed to be Jews. I mean, if you look at the articles in Time magazine and so on, they always mention that Hebrews. They use a polite word.
Yes. And I think okay.
No, go ahead.
No.
Well, I was just going to ask because I know we're running, and I'm sorry, I've been notified there's a bit of an issue with my audio, so I apologize for any weird noise. But Jim, I'm wondering if you might want to share with us some of maybe just your favorite anecdote from the book, since it just came out and it's so fantastic overall. Just if you wanted to share with us your favorite thing that you discovered while at this.
Well, the thing is that this goes back to McCary. McCary, was a kind of successful freelancer, and Paramount wanted to put him on contract, and he didn't want to, because he specifically did not want to direct the Marx Brothers, and then the Marx Brothers had a fight with the studio, and they left. They were going to go out and produce their own, and then McCary signed the contract with Paramount, and then he had to direct the Marx Brothers, and he complained about it. I mean, he's interviewed by Cahiers du Cinema in like the 60s, and he's still complaining about how awful, the Marx Brothers were. They took a different attitude towards him. They just turned him into some character that would be like them, he just was like gambling and running around, drinking all the, but they were very hard to work with. You couldn't get them. It was very hard to get all three of them on the set at the same time. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Well, That's just it's been a great joy to talk about this film. I wish we could do Marx Brothers every time, but of course we have much better things in store. All of the audience will learn about it soon enough. We'll be sending around some information about our upcoming films. Thank you all for joining us. Please do get Jim's book. It's such a fun read, as fun as the movie itself. And Violet, thank you for joining the team, our ragtag crew here. So thank you all. And if you're watching this on YouTube, and if you're watching this on Facebook, stay tuned for more information about the next films.
Good night, folks.
Bye.
Good night.